You are listening to The Diary of a Wannabe Writer, presented by Richard A. Boxshall, in which I chronicle my life and attempts to become a professional writer by, doing some writing daily, hopefully. Hello, today is Saturday the 30th of November 2024 and you are listening to The Diary of a Wannabe Writer. And I've had a weird anxiousy day today, so I was hoping to get some writing done. I was supposed to be going into Milton Keynes to meet up with the writing group that I like meeting, and they had a writing session today between 2 and 4, and I just couldn't go. Basically, I just felt like I didn't want to leave home. When I get anxious, I just like to be surrounded by comfortable stuff. So yeah, it's a shame because I would have started writing chapter 38 if I'd done that. And when I finished chapter 37 the other day, it struck me how initially at the beginning of this podcast I was very, very productive, and now particularly since September, particularly since the anxieties kind of kicked in, I've been really unproductive. I think it was the 13th of September when I signed off chapter 36, and then it was just a couple of days ago that I signed off chapter 37. So it's taken me 2.5 months, just under, to write a chapter. So that's not great. But it is what it is. I'm not going to stop doing the podcast or anything, because it does motivate me a little bit sometimes. And also I've got some ideas of what I want to do next year, so I might as well briefly share that with you. So I'm going to keep going this year until into December, and then at some point in December I'm going to stop and have some time off. I won't be podcasting over Christmas. So it will be, what I'm kind of hoping is if I can basically do it daily from this point onwards, I will hit show 200 on the 23rd, and that feels like a good place to stop for the year and then pick up again in the new year. Unless an amazing something happens and I suddenly start writing between Christmas and New Year, in which case obviously I will just pop up and say that's happened. But the current plan is to try and get to show 200 on the 23rd, and then have like a week and a day off and come back on the 1st of January. That will be what I call season 2. So I shall start the numbers again. I'm not just going to keep going up from in numbers. It'll be season 2, episode 1, and so on when I start in January. I've got new music. Well, I've got new music. I haven't decided whether the stuff I'm using at the moment that I'm planning is going to be the music I end up using, but there will be new music for and new titles for the second season for 2025, and that same music will be used to introduce my live streams as well. So it'll be consistent branding, as they say. And then we shall just see what happens next year, really. So that's kind of my plans. I've done a lot of reading. Although I haven't done a lot of writing, I have done a lot of reading. I was just looking back at the reading I've done, and as well as reading the 2 Murakami books, his new one, The City and Its Uncertain Walls, and the one that it has a lot of ties in with, which is Hardboiled Wonderland and The End of the World. I read both of those. I read a book called November for my book club, which is by an author called Elle McCrae, which I quite liked. Trying to remember what else I've read this month. I've read a decent amount. I've read the Douglas Adams book, The Salmon of Doubt, which is basically something they published after he died, which had just unfinished, magazine articles and bits and pieces he had written. There's some lovely bits in there. In places, it almost read like an autobiography. It also had a bit of what would have been the next book he wrote, The Salmon of Doubt. Yeah, so I read that. I read Witches Abroad, the Terry Pratchett book, which I do like the occasional Pratchett. And then the thing I started reading, and this doesn't seem to be on here, but I also read a book called Starship Titanic, which was a Douglas Adams computer game, but when he suggested it becomes a book as well, the people behind the game said, "Oh yes, yes, it needs to be published at the same time as the game. They need to tie in." And he didn't have time to write the book, so he got Terry Jones of Monty Python fame to write it for him. I finished reading that today. Wasn't very impressed, but yeah. So that's what I've read this month. And then I picked up couple of weeks, so a week ago last Saturday, my local bookshop was doing this little incentive. If you bought something on the day, you could there was a little lucky dip, then you could get a voucher of some kind. So I was determined to actually buy something in the store on the day, and I found a book called Before We Forget I think it's called Before We Can Forget Kindness, or Before We Forget Kindness, by a Japanese author called Toshikazu Kawaguchi. And I think the reason it appealed to me was I don't know if it was that, I think it was that day actually, I'd written this birthday card to someone on a Reddit group called Random Acts of Cards, and I'm kind of, in my head was the whole kind of people aren't kind enough to each other anymore. And so the book title caught my attention, and I was determined to, because I order loads of books from the shop, but I very rarely walk in and just buy something off the shelf, so I was determined to do that. And the guy who ran the shop just said, "Oh, you know, that's book 5 in a series, don't you?" And I was like, "Oh." I thought my plans were dashed to buy an actual book in the store. So what I did was I ended up buying book 1, pre-ordering it, but I did buy book 5 as well. I just had this hunch that I would like it, and it's a series of books. The first one, and they're not long books, the first one is called Before the Coffee Gets Cold, and it's about this coffee shop that's like it's not underground, but it's in a it is sort of underground. It's an underground cafe, not in the not being allowed to be there sense, just in the physical where it is sense. It's an underground cafe, and it has the ability to make you travel in time, but there are some very specific rules. So you have to be sitting in one particular chair, one particular seat at a particular table in the coffee shop. What makes it more complicated is that a ghost sits in that seat, and they get up once every 24 hours to visit the bathroom, and you can only occupy the seat when the ghost goes to visit the bathroom. The second thing is, when you travel in time, you don't leave the coffee shop. You stay in the same seat. The third thing is, if you want to meet someone, you can only meet someone that's already been in the coffee shop. So you're actually basically effectively going back in time to a point within the coffee shop. And you don't have forever. You can't spend hours there. You literally have until the coffee gets cold. Hence the title, Before the Coffee Gets Cold. It's just a really nice little idea. And from what I can see, each book, and there are 5 in the series so far, each book is effectively 4 shortish stories, but set within that setup. Oh, and the other thing is, if you don't drink all the coffee, and if you don't finish it before it gets cold, you become the next ghost that sits at that seat. So, it's quite interesting. And so I've read the first story, and the first story basically has to set all this up. So it's a very, very basic little story about somebody who split up with a boyfriend, and he effectively dumps her at the coffee shop. He takes her in there and effectively dumps her, and she wants to go back, and she felt she just gave in too easily. Oh, and the other rule is you can't change anything. So if even if you have a conversation in the past, say for example, she wants to go and talk to her boyfriend, and the cafe owner's saying, well, you can do that, but he will still split up with you. You can't change the fact that he, splits up with you and goes to America. So, but what you find out after the first short story is you can influence events. So yes, they did split up, but he will try and find her when he gets back from America in a couple of years' time. So suddenly, from that being an absolutely final relationship's over, I have to do this, it's my job, it's my career, but I'll come and find you when I get back. And it's a bit weird, because I think in the real world, if you were so so small a part of someone's consideration, they don't even consult you. They just say, "Oh, I'm going," and you're dumped. You probably wouldn't really want to save that relationship. But it was just a very clever little introduction into this weird little coffee shop. And it's literally tiny. It's got a coffee bar with 3 seats on it, and then it's got 3 more tables with room for 2 on each side. One of which, of course, is always occupied by the ghost. So you can only get 9 patrons in there, 8 if somebody shares a table with a ghost, and so on. So it's I've read the first 50 pages, which is the first of the 4 little stories in this book. But no, I'm enjoying it. So, and I'd never heard of that before. So yes, I found this book because I saw the title, Before We Forget Kindness, which is, I think, the 5th book title. Toshikazu Kawaguchi. So anyway, I've waffled on a little bit more than I thought I would. I will try and be back tomorrow. As I say, I would like to try and get a little bit. I go back to, I don't know. I have applied for additional unpaid leave, but I may not find out that I've got it until like the day before I've got it. So I don't know if I'm going back to work on the 4th or the 12th. Hopefully it's the 12th, but we shall see. Anyway, I talked a lot there. I will be back at some point tomorrow. Maybe I'll have done some writing. You never know. Probably not, though. Take care. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to The Diary of a Wannabe Writer, presented by Richard A. Boxall. Thank you for tuning in to my random ramblings. And if you'd like to know more about me or my projects, visit my link tree at linktr.ee/Richard Wright, capital R, capital W. Thank you for listening.